Hey, power people. Welcome to Renewable Rides. I'm Gareth Evans.
And I'm Dan Roberts. We're the founding team of VECKTA, a platform and marketplace streamlining how companies buy on-site energy.
In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition through the experiences of our team and our inspiring guests.
Our goal is to help companies take action to create a resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future.
Let's go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. And today, Dan and I are super excited to be joined by Beatrice Petrovich, who is the Senior Analyst and Energy Specialist for Ember. Beatrice, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on. And as you know, we always start with asking our guests what they're passionate about. So we'd love to get to know you a bit and learn about what are you personally passionate about.
Sure. I love spending time outdoor. I live in Switzerland, close to the woods, so it's nice to have some nature next to me. And I love cyclists. I'm a cycling enthusiast, love riding around Zurich. I have a family cargo bike, and I think we have more than 11,000 kilometers on now in less than 3 years. Yeah, that's my passion.
And do you ever venture off trail?
Oh, yeah. Yes. And we did a lot with my husband before having kids, but also with kids now they're joining us. Last summer, we went on some days off on a camping site, and we went by bike, carrying everybody on its bike. That was fun.
That's amazing. Good. Well, do you want to build on that and introduce yourself and your role and share with our listeners how you ended up where you are today and what you're responsible for?
Sure. I'm Senior Energy and Climate Analyst at Ember, which is an independent energy think tank. So our core mission is to create targeted data insights that would accelerate policies that shift the world towards clean and electrified energy future. So to do this, we gather, curate, and analyze data on the global power system. And I'm part of the Europe team that analyze those data, focusing strictly on Europe and the EU. I'm really proud to say that everything that we do in terms of data is free and easy to download from our site. So it's really open access data that we promote. And how do I end up being in Ember? So I joined Ember last September after about 10 years of professional experience in the energy sector. I've been a consultant, a gas analyst in a past life, researcher. And in my research, I also worked on clean energy solutions, including local energy system, residential solar, and energy communities. And then I landed to Ember.
Nice. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your PhD? Because I know you're a bit shy about this, and we didn't know whether to introduce you as a doctor or not, but you are indeed a doctor, and you've obviously worked extremely hard to get that. Do you want to tell us a bit about the PhD?
Oh, sure. No, I'm proud of my PhD journey. So I got my PhD from the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. It's a business school in the Institute for Economy and the Environment. So as I told you, I used to be a consultant and a gas analyst. I really wanted to transition to other solutions, other forms of energy. That's how I started the PhD in St. Gallen on management of renewable energies. My focus was on residential solar, investment in residential solar, consumer preferences for solar. And then I moved on, also stayed a bit in the university, working on local energy systems and social acceptance of energy communities. That was very exciting as well.
Amazing.
That's great. That's very much in alignment with how we see the world and distributed energy systems. Before we kind of really dig into especially energy and specifically in Europe, can you tell us a little bit more about what success looks like in your world and in the work that you're doing?
Yes, I'm a strong believer in the power of collaboration. So empowering others to work towards a common goal is really something that means success to me. In Ember, we also want this open data to empower other people work, and so allowing people to shift the world toward a clean, electrified energy future. And specific to energy, I think success for me is making energy engaging and relevant to different stakeholders.
Awesome.
Amen.
You're speaking our language on many levels. The whole reason for starting the podcast, Beatrice, was to actually make energy interesting and fun and engaging. And we're firm believers in providing data and insights that people can make informed decisions and make confident decisions, because I think today a lot of people are operating on not a lot of knowledge or misconceptions. And so love your mission.
Yeah, I agree. So true.
Transitioning a little bit into the energy sector, and I know a lot of your work focuses on Europe, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit. Let's start on the utility side of things. We've been reading and from our previous trip a couple of weeks back to Germany that the EU is progressing on reducing dependence on fossil fuels and increasing the penetration of renewables. Can you give us an overview of the latest energy mix, how that's changing, what the next, say, 2, 5, 10 years look like?
Sure. The power mix in the EU clearly show that the EU is in a full swing transition away from fossil fuels, and renewables are really becoming this backbone of the Europe electricity system. EU is really, I would say, becoming a global leader ahead of global average for renewable penetration in the power mix. So to give some numbers, so last year we just released the annual data. Renewables had a record 44% share of electricity production in the EU. This is faster than anyone thought possible, and it's above global average. And within this, wind and solar were behind the big growth. And wind and solar alone, it's a quarter of annual power generated in the EU. For the first time, above a quarter, just two, like wind and solar. And the milestone that I think is very meaningful is that wind power surpassed fossil gas power generation for the first time. So more power was produced by wind than by fossil gas. And so with this growth of renewables, we also see this decline in fossil fuel power, especially coal, was confirmed structural decline in Europe. There was just temporary opening up, like delaying the closure of coal power plants with the crisis and spiking gas prices. But then it was really temporary. So there's no coal come back. Mm-hmm. And we think, looking at the data, that gas will be next to enter this decline in the power mix.
Very interesting. And how are you seeing the kind of utility sector manage? Are they also deploying a lot of storage to supplement the intermittent wind and solar?
Sure. I think looking at the future, what we see that renewables are on course in the EU to generate 66% of EU electricity by 2030, which is a lot, 44 to 66. Yeah. And we know, and for this, flexibility needs are increasing, and actually projection is double what we have today, so doubling the need. And that's why, alongside this growth of wind and solar, we need this combination of grid, storage, demand-side flexibility that will be key for the power system of the future. It's really the new frontier, the last piece of decarbonization for the power sector. And as you say, there has been a lot going on. We see deployment is real. You mentioned storage. That also was a remarkable recent growth. In the EU, storage capacity doubled in 1 year, and the contribution of behind the meter storage is significant. You mentioned Germany, and like behind the meter, Germany is really leading the way in the behind the meter battery storage. So, but it's interesting to see like that 80% of this big chunk of storage, which is like beyond what any other country in Europe, is mostly residential. So it's battery located in residential buildings. So then therefore there are industrial storage too, but I think like in the industry sector could do more. Now what we see now, residential storage account for 80% of total battery storage, and 80% of new home solar installation have battery storage attached.
Is that because of policy, or is that because of personal interest and people wanting to do it for the right reasons or do it to save cost? What do you think has driven that?
Yeah, it's a mixed policy, the right policy framework, but also the business case for behind the meter storage is improving. And I also think that's the reason why like large company could actually jump into this, will jump into this next. The potential is very promising. Basically, on the one hand, the cost of battery is rapidly declining. So they're already becoming cost competitive, but costs are expected to drop even more with ramping up of production. But also with co-located storage, solar electricity is valued much more. And the more solar you have in the system, the more it makes sense to add storage to your solar panel. You know that, I think.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Having seen that transition away from solar, maybe with a battery, to then a lot of cases now it's battery with solar. You know, it's flipped the script.
Absolutely.
And so, Beatrice, it's amazing how quickly that's happened. And then to get to the next stage, Dan and I were both in Hanover a few weeks ago, and we were surprised by how Europe seems to have gone all in on hydrogen. That seems to be the next big opportunity and the big focal area to take it to the next level again. Can you tell us about how hydrogen is progressing, what the opportunity is, and why you think we've ended up in that position from a hydrogen perspective, particularly in Europe?
Yeah, I think Germany is also a special case because it's one of the countries that is really considering hydrogen-based power generation as a potential solution for managing those several days of demand-supply mismatch with increasing shares of renewables. So Germany is, I think, could be very salient there, the discussion, given the recent proposals. I mean, we know that there's a renewable growth rapid in Europe. Flexibility needs are increasing. And flexible operation of these electrolyzers that can use supply, like renewable generation for green hydrogen, could be a way to balance the system. There are some caveats, though, that I think kind of are not maybe too often mentioned in the discussion and in this lots of attention that it gets. So one being that hydrogen in the power sector to be used for flexibility needs, it requires a whole infrastructure, right, to store, transport, and use it for power generation. Which brings me to the next caveat, which is this use case is still in an nascent stage of development, and the cost of this whole infrastructure is still uncertain. And the other thing that we know that there might be other use cases for hydrogen in hard-to-abate sector that might be more cost-effective. And maybe the third and maybe most important caveat is that there are alternatives already that could do cheaper and simpler the same job for long duration storage or source of flexibility. You mentioned battery storage earlier. There's a lot of potential on demand side flexibility here. Interconnection in Europe can do some of this job. Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying, it's important to put green hydrogen into context. It's worth saying that we have a whole core flexibility toolkit at our disposal already.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that. I think that was probably our observation. It felt like there's been a lot of amazing progress made on the electrolyzer front, and the costs are coming down, but they're still not, big stackable products yet. And we felt like there was the use case and the need on the downstream side, either used in industrial processes and or potentially energy. But the whole middle supply chain piece of the puzzle, it felt like there wasn't necessarily a good game plan for that, and that no one really knew who was responsible for building it, financing it. Is it private? Is it government? And so it's interesting to hear you sort of validate that thinking. In terms of other alternatives, are you seeing any other major trends or things that you're excited about that will help with that sort of continual phasing of renewables into the system?
Sure. I think what I'm very excited about are these enablers of a renewable-based energy system that we start seeing playing out in Europe. And one is this untapped potential for demand-side flexibility, which, by the way, it's another way where large companies can contribute to the energy transition, reduce emissions, but also cut costs and be more efficient, more at the forefront of innovation. And this will be triggered by smart electrification, which I think is another like source of new business model innovation. I'm very excited about this, also because I think this demand flexibility on the consumer side is potentially one of the cheapest forms that we have flexibility, plus returns money directly to the pockets of consumers in exchange for their flexibility and contribution. In our recent report, we see that, however, this is still kind of overlooked, not much attention being given from policymakers, energy system planners. But yeah, awareness of potential is really growing. That's what I think is really exciting. Lots of effort to unlock flexibility. Yeah, and there's no need to wait for Brussels or regulation to be unlocked. There are new business models that are there for actors who dare to innovate.
We really view that as this transition from passive consumers of electricity to prosumers of electricity, where you're actually interacting with the grid, communicating with the grid, and providing that flexibility. I'd be curious, Beatrice, what advice do you have to business leaders with operations, especially large scale manufacturing and food and beverage production, distribution, logistics, kind of the more industrial side of the commercial industrial space? What advice do you have them as they're looking at this broad landscape of energy options? The grid is cleaning up, prices are going up. There's opportunities to deploy your own systems, deploy demand side management. There's a lot of different things they should be looking at. How do you? What's your advice to them on how they should be thinking about this energy transition?
Yeah, good question. I think I see a lot of corporate leaders are progressive, embracing already the new paradigm and the opportunities to innovate. I think it's important to keep in mind, very basic, not to underestimate the fact that going faster really brings benefit. So move in this direction now. There's much to gain if they're accelerated transition, if they embrace those technologies, are part of this transition, if they electrify, if they move to renewable energies, away from fossil fuels. Really, I think this is kind of crucial to understand that it's good for economic growth, competitiveness, but also avoiding those material risks that climate change brings. So I think that my advice would be, not underestimate it. Going faster is bringing benefit.
Yeah. And maybe the flip of that same question is, what would you say are some of the more common misconceptions about that the EU business leaders have about this energy transition? And maybe that's part of it is, well, if I wait a little bit, the prices are going to come down even more, or the grid's going to clean up more. What are the more common misconceptions you see?
Yeah. So as I said, there's a variety of approaches, some are very progressive, but what I see, some might not be understanding that this is happening already, because it's kind of unstoppable. So we have the technology solution, as we discussed. So there's no reason to wait. And I think the implication of that are two. Like, one is that not to underestimate the business model innovation potential that there is to this change. Like, going away from status quo brings a lot of innovation and business model potential. And also the other thing that sometimes could happen, that they ended up being in a very counterproductive behavior for economic growth, which is like they try to slow down strong policy signals and clear objective for the transition. But policy consistency, long-term goals are really good for business, even more important now in the transition. So I think business can be very strong voice in asking to be clear and forward-looking to policymakers.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a theme. I'm actually up in Alaska right now, Beatrice, and it's a theme that several companies have been talking about here, is that they are seeking certainty of policy and direction so that they can actually plan with confidence. But I think, to your point, that they have a really big role to play in actually influencing what that policy and direction should be, and having the commercial mechanisms to actually get there.
Is that some of the work that you and your team member are doing as far as the analysis and research and making that data available? Like, how much of the work that you're doing is with the policymakers, whether at the country level or at the overall EU level?
Yes, we work with policymakers to inform policy decision is really our mandate. Yes, like open data, we think we can generate also like change in behavior, like by the fact that we're shifting kind of the narrative, like building up confidence in these new solutions, like showing the data, showing the progress. This is kind of building up the confidence. And I think this is not just relevant for policymakers, but it's also relevant for decision makers in the industry space, because they see what's happening. So this tracking, I think, goes beyond like influencing like policy decisions, but it's also create confidence in investing, right? Because when there is like an outlook, when there is some more data, scenarios of their investments, it's easier to make, like, because with elements to the decision. I think informing through data, I think it's important for us also, like thinking about investors, but also industry that see the progress through the data, of course. And
based on what you're working on right now, Beatrice, what are you most excited about, or what success stories are you seeing that you can share?
Oh yeah, so I mentioned already it's exciting for demand side flexibility. The next one would be, I think, battery storage. When I'm very excited, we wrote in our latest report on the Europe electricity system, our Europe electricity review, that this year might be the year of the battery. So battery are kind of becoming those new peakers, displacing fossil gas in the evening peak, acting like this time machine that allows you to have solar power when it's dark, or cheap wind power when you have high demand. So I see this combination of battery and storage has been like very promising. High growth potential for this, potential for savings, potential for cleaning up even more the energy mix.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, we agree. It's a critical component of all of this. Can you point to any specific success stories, whether it be large corporates that have really embraced the transition and to your point before, really leaned into making it happen faster, or utilities that are really at the forefront of this? Can you speak to some specific examples or success stories?
Yeah, I think there are many of them, like utilities going green, pushing for like more renewable energy in the system, but also I think the nice story is also behind power purchase agreements, like really companies deciding to source directly renewable power from generator. And very recently, the EU formally approved this electricity market reform. This is meant to push even further this PPA, power purchase agreement. I think this is kind of a very exciting development. Lots of success stories and also active choice behind solution to find the good fit financing model and funding model for new projects beyond, like, without waiting for incentives, state support. So I think, this is, I see as a kind of emerging success story.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. Yeah, I think it's a critical component, because even if you're deploying on-site systems, you often have additional power needs, and being able to source those from clean sources is a really important bit. Well, I think we may move into our power surge round to get some the questions that we ask all of our guests. So if I transition there, we always like to start the power surge with if you could be any energy technology, what would it be and why?
Oh, good question. I think I would be rooftop solar. I mean, it was a key component for my PhD. And if I want to be more specific, building integrated PV. That was one of my topics. So this building integrated solar panels. So like solar panels can be attached to roof or facade, or could be part of the body of the building. So it could be an element of the building. So instead of like having tiles, you would have solar tiles, for instance. And the cool thing about BIPV, so building integrated PV, is that it's kind of a segment full of innovation, like where you can experiment with colors, shapes, and it's kind of an intersection between technology and art, kind of still unknown but beautiful. Yeah, so maybe not the cheapest applications, but it's definitely there for some premium application, and showcase solar to the wider public. So that's why I'm very excited.
That's amazing.
But rooftop solar, it's kind of easy for communities to get involved, and comes to your home place as all this combination.
We came full circle back to your PhD, Beatrice. I'm actually now super curious, like what was the biggest finding or outcome or conclusion of your PhD that you could share?
Oh yeah, I mean, there were many, I think going back to building integrated photovoltaic, we had like this exercise where we would segment potential PV adopters in different customer segments. Some of them would care more about the beauty, and some others would care more about cost. And we were like able to show like what was actually different segment are happy to pay as a premium for aesthetic. And we did it for the Swiss market, kind of established a methodology that could be used also outside. Yeah, that was one that I'd like to mention.
Nice. That's great. So you obviously do a lot of reading, a lot of research. Do you have any favorite recommended sources of information, whether it's books or podcasts or newsletters?
Yeah, so I like to listen to podcasts. I like two that I like energy related are Cleaning Up and Zero. But books, I think I recently just bought Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie for an boost of hope and optimism when it comes to this great climate crisis challenge. And I also love, and it's full of example of success stories of industry and like corporate leader as well, is Climate Capitalism. That I think I could recommend to business leaders because it's full of inspiring success stories. And last but not least, Ember monthly newsletter I would recommend because it's for those passionate about data and data visualization. Once a month, you get a lot of that in your inbox.
I'm glad you put the plug in because I was going to ask at some point. You've mentioned a couple times all of the research and data and statistics that at Ember you and your team, all the content that you create is publicly available. Where can our listeners find that information?
Yeah, they can find all the information on our website, emberclimate.org. And so it's everything there. We have a section on data tools where you can download data, but also visualize data directly on the website. And yeah, there are also a lot of live trackers for renewable energy targets by country that we maintain. So it's everything on the website, emberclimate.org.
Great. Yeah, that's Ember Climate, EMBER climate.org, right? Perfect. Well, I'll close out with, and this is one of my favorite is, so Beatrice, as you kind of look ahead, what does this statement look like for you personally or professionally in the context of the global energy transition? In my life, I will have been successful when
I contribute to the better future for next generations.
Wonderful. Yeah. Love that. Beatrice, really appreciate the time. I think if any of our listeners wanted to follow up with you directly, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yes, again, like emberclimate.org, the website. They can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, or again, through the website, you'll find all the contact details. Looking forward to hearing from your listeners. And thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for jumping on. Really appreciate your time and your insights, Beatrice.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work you do.
Beatrice.
Well, Dan, here we are. It's a little over a week since we recorded that great episode with Beatrice, and I just listened back to it. Man, I was in bad shape. I think for those that aren't aware and for those that are, I was a few days post finishing my 100-miler. And even to get the intro, it took us several attempts. And I definitely didn't have the same energy, enthusiasm, or clarity of mind in that episode. And I suppose apologies to Beatrice and the audience, but it was a bit of a rare occasion, and we'll cover off the details of what the 100-miler entailed and its parallels to the energy transition probably in another episode. But here we are reflecting on this one, and it was a great recording. Beatrice was awesome. Dan, what were your big takeaways?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I don't think you owe any of us an apology to run 100 miles and be in tip-top shape right afterwards. Should not be expected. So I think it's a commendable effort, and I think it also emphasizes for all of us, and regardless of what we do, we need to make time to refresh and recoup and take care of the body and mind. So that was a good one. But Beatrice, what an amazing kind of mind and approach, and I just really loved her personal ethos and that of Ember, which was really to make data and education and awareness available to help drive policy and drive action. The fact that they make all of their research available, publicly available, I think is amazing, and I think it really aligns with a lot of what we do here as far as really trying to deliver actionable intelligence and insights to enable, in our case, businesses to act, and in Ember's case, largely policy to act. And we'll touch a bit more on the policy-driven nature of Europe here in a second. But I think the big thing that actually stood out to me is that Europe is well ahead of the U.S. as it relates to renewable penetration on the grid. She even quoted that by 2030, they're expecting to have about 66% renewable penetration on the grid. So for companies, when they're thinking about decarbonization, they can lean a little bit more on the utilities and the grid in Europe, unlike here in the U.S. However, I do think that they can't overlook the energy security and the energy cost component and the value that distributed energy systems provide in those respects. So again, loved her energy, and I look forward to having more people like her on. But Gareth, anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, I think what was super interesting for me, she'd obviously done her PhD on residential and community-based systems and behind-the-meter opportunities. And I think what was an interesting stat is like storage has doubled quite quickly in Europe to support the penetration of renewables. but most of it, 80%, she said, has been behind the meter residential. And when we asked around, is that policy driven or other, she was actually saying it's economics. Actually, these systems have come down so much in price, and it offsets the cost of energy, and it supports greater penetration of these resources, that it really made economic viable sense for people to be considering it. We here in the US don't see many residents adopting it, but more and more businesses, because of the economic sense. And I think that was super interesting. And I think to continue to drive that renewable penetration at scale, the next big items are, how do we deploy more storage, either utility scale and or for businesses? And I think huge opportunity for businesses in Europe to embrace it more so. How do we create more demand side flexibility, especially around monetizing that and finding appliances and operations that are willing to and able to flex to support the grid infrastructure and potentially even transact that energy. And then lastly was around what are the other big levers, and hydrogen being a big one that I think, Dan, you and I saw in Hanover and seeing Europe adopting. And I think the big takeaways for us there was the technology to produce the hydrogen is continuing to improve. The use cases on the back end in terms of industrial applications and maybe long haul transport seem to really make sense. And I think it was nice hearing Beatrice kind of validate that using it for power definitely isn't proven today. The economics don't necessarily work. At the show, Dan, you and I were quoted by someone, the price of hydrogen needs to be under $5 per kilogram. Today it's in excess of 12. And I think the whole midstream infrastructure, the transportation, the logistics of moving it around, piping it, and monetizing that is not very clear whether that's a government-led initiative or whether that's industry's responsibility. And I think they were the big questions for us coming out of the show.
Yeah. The thing is, I think back to the Hanover Mess show that really stood out for me that I don't think I appreciated going in is the fact that in Europe, it is much more top-down policy driven. Sure. And I think in retrospect, that's not necessarily a surprise. We see that they are much more advanced and ahead of the U.S. as it relates to emissions and decarbonization disclosures and all of the requirements around that. So I think it's much more top of mind for individuals. It's much more top of mind for business leaders. But I think that ends up that whole policy infrastructure also enables people to wait and kind of see where the policymakers want to go and what bets they want to make versus taking matters into their own hands. And I think that's also possibly a bit of the general ethos. I mean, here in the U.S., it's a land of opportunity and take matters into your own hands and grab yourself by the bootstraps and make it happen. And so I think we see that in the way that businesses are acting and how they're looking at deploying these systems.
Yeah, I think there was a real envy, wasn't there, for the Inflation Reduction Act here in the US, where the framework and the commercial incentives have been set for people to then use their commercial savviness, their innovation, their go-get-em attitude to actually go and figure out from a free market perspective what are the right solutions and to prove it and validate it. And certainly the big difference here would be, on the hydrogen hub perspective, is actually building industrial hydrogen hubs where it actually removes the whole infrastructure challenge, because you're going to generate, store it, use it right in one center. And I think proving or validating that is super interesting. And then just having massive tax incentives for people to go and deploy behind the meter on-site energy systems at scale has really unlocked the market here. And I think the Green Deal in Europe is, by all accounts, meant to have as much money available, but the feedback from people on the ground was it was too complex, too burdensome. It was hard to understand how you actually even access the money. And I think that's the opportunity for Europe, isn't it? Is that the mechanics are there, the opportunity is there. How do they kind of really empower and enable people to get after it and remove some of the bureaucracy in the process?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, time will tell. The combination of the energy security, which in Germany in particular was you could tell that was a concern, especially given everything that's been going on in Ukraine. But then also the costs, and we see that it's actually impacting businesses and driving decision making at the very top level of some of the most biggest businesses in the world. I mean, Germany has been for many centuries, or one of the leaders from a manufacturing perspective. Yet we see some German companies looking to move out of the region or being forced to shut down operations. BASF, one of the biggest chemical companies in the world, who has an enormous facility. I mean, we're talking a city, like the size of a city, essentially, an enormous facility that had to shut down operations due to costs and access to additional energy. So these are growing concerns, and I think more businesses are gonna see this and look for alternative options. I am curious to see, as we support some of our multinational clients, as we dig deeper into some of these European businesses and working with these European business leaders, what their sentiments are like. I felt like a lot of what we talked about, or a lot of who we talked to at the show, were folks within the industry that were either developers or equipment makers, people that are really trying to drive this and make this happen. I want to talk to more actual business owners that are the ones that stand to benefit from these systems, to see how they're going to react to these solutions.
Yeah, 100%. We actually, I was looking at some stats yesterday, Dan, and for one of our customers who had numerous sites around the world, and it was interesting to look at the emissions data, and for these particular like-for-like business settings, it was 250 tons of emissions per year here in the US versus 150 for the same facility in Europe. And so it's actually quite interesting to see, to your point before, from an emissions perspective, maybe the driver isn't as significant, but certainly cost and resilience is definitely front of mind. And Ukraine doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. And so being able to be more self-reliant and not have to rely on gas coming from all over the world to facilitate the transition will be critical. Yeah,
absolutely. I think I thoroughly enjoyed, like, from a reflection on Hanover, I think I was impressed by the level of sophistication and variety of the different technologies. I mean, gosh, walking over to Siemens booth, for example, was mind-blowing. I continue to tell people that I ask me about the trip and everything. Siemens had a booth the size of a football pitch, and we're giving guided tours of their booth on its own. And so that was inspiring. And the folks that we talked to, some of the leaders that we talked to from Siemens while we were there, I think it's exciting to see what's on the bleeding edge of some of these technology companies. I think the more we can help drive this adoption, the better. We just have to kind of help them get out of their own way in some respects.
Yeah. I love the metaverse manufacturing facility of the future. That was super cool, being able to change what you're producing almost on the fly and have it all automated and roboticized. And it was super incredible. And I think that would really help demand side flexibility if you've got these completely automated facilities that can be stopped and started and adjusted in terms of what they're going to produce, can really help manage that energy consumption profile.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm looking forward to our next trip out there. I think we're continuing to support more companies that have operations across Europe, and time will tell with how much interest kind of more local companies, not just the multinationals, but the more local companies, the Mittelstand in Germany, really want to adopt these systems.
Yeah. Big shout out to Beatrice. Really appreciate time and insights, and Ember for continuing to make this data super accessible. We certainly integrate some of it into the platform from an emissions profile perspective for Europe, and super valuable data that really helps drive cool outcomes for our customers. So love it. Appreciate you, Beatrice.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers, Dan.
See ya.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts,
blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.